If you lose 50% in the market, right? You say you have a portfolio of $100,000, you lose $50,000. Automatically, you have to make double that to get back to base.
Yeah.
Your losses actually compound faster and are greater over a short period of time than your gains.
If you are going for a tough time, the best thing to do is just stay on the path. Just go to the gym.
Yeah.
Even if it's a shit workout, just show up.
Yeah.
Because if you completely let go, it's going to be so much harder. Just get back to that base level. And that's when that foundation comes in, as you're saying. You've got to have the knowledge. Why are you doing what you're doing? Why do you need to think all these good things?
Yeah.
You got to understand why. Why? Because it's in those tough times where essentially you will fall off. On today's episode, we're going to discuss compounding. I guess, what do you think of when someone says compounding? What's the first thing you think of?
Financial compounding.
Sure, yeah. Like you put your money into the S&P, over time that compounds, the interest also compounds, and before you know it, you got to generate a sum of money.
Yeah, exponential returns,
Sure,
essentially.
yeah. But on today's episode, I guess we're not going to talk too much about the financial side, but that same process, I would say, does apply to every other aspect of your life. And that's what we're going to detail. What does that look like? What does compounding your life look like? And also the inverse of that. If you compound the other way, what happens then? The glass shatters. Can you come out of that? What does that look like?
So you're talking in terms of compounding of habits, certain areas in your life, whether it be relationships, whether it be exercise. You're saying that those can compound in a similar manner to, or financial.
Sure.
Is that the point that you're trying to make?
Yeah, sure. Right. I would say everything can compound on that same merit.
Yeah.
That's your relationships, your habits, your thoughts, even the way you look. Everything, I would say, is based on that notion.
Yeah. I mean, probably good to start with the financial, because I think that's probably the most commonly understood version of the compounding. So I suppose, do you want to start us off by, stipulating specifically what it is, compound interest in a financial sense, and then we'll be, I think, able to relate that to other areas.
Yeah, sure. I guess the compounding in a financial sense is you put a certain amount of your capital in an investment, you get paid distributions or interest on that, and those distributions and interests also compound every year. So if you do that for 5 years, you're probably not going to get a good return, right?
Yeah.
But if you do it for 30, you're going to have a good sum of money.
Yeah.
And I would say that also applies to exercise. If you exercise for a year, it's probably not going to do it a whole lot, but if you do it over the long run, it's probably going to have a pretty profound effect, I would say.
Well, I mean, the whole premise is that, say you start compounding today, the amount you make in a year is going to be insignificant compared to if you do it for 10 years. Essentially, what you make in 1 year is what you've made for the last 10.
Sure.
That's the power of it, I suppose. So there is real importance in understanding what's actually going on.
Sure, and it highlights the importance of starting early. If you start compounding at 20 and someone else starts at 25, actually those 5 years over the next 30 years are going to be massive in the material difference.
Yeah.
And that would apply to, if you're in a hole physically and you only want to, you start at 25 and someone else started at 20, it's going to be much harder to be healthy at 25 than the person starting at 20.
Yeah. I mean, because obviously it's easy to say just put your money in the market or work towards some sort of goal, but do you have to be smart about what the things you actually undertake are? Like, is it just you can go put your money in XYZ stock and then expect compounding returns, or is there actually some strategy you have to put in place for it to actually work in that compounding manner like we elaborated before?
Well, you can just put your money in S&P index.
Yeah.
You don't have to burn too many brain cells putting your money in there. You're pretty safe over the long run. It's going to compound and you're going to get, in most regards, an above average return.
I suppose the point I'm making though is if you go and you put it in a bunch of different stocks, right? The problem with that is if you don't have the basis of knowledge to understand how stock prices actually work and what it actually how value relates to price, I suppose, if you don't have that basis. Well, the likelihood you're going to make bad decisions that lead to actual loss rather than positive compounding is quite high. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you probably wouldn't be buying individual stocks though.
Yeah, but my point is that stipulates that there needs to be foundation for decision making. Even understanding that putting your money in an ETF is the smarter choice when you don't have a foundation in stock analysis. That takes actual knowledge in itself, because you realize, well, you're buying the average of every stock in that market. So essentially your returns and losses are going to reflect every single stock. And we know, essentially in a financial term, the reason that is important is because diversification stops you from losing all your money, essentially. But the problem with that is it also limits your upside.
Yeah, sure.
I think my point there is foundation matters. It matters in a financial sense, but it also matters in a habit sense as well. So I think that's probably where I want to lead the conversation a little bit.
Yeah, I would say it matters more in a habit sense. Whereas you, to be honest, you probably don't need to know a whole lot if you're just chucking your money in an index. You probably don't even need to understand the index. You just whack your money there. Yeah. Whereas in a personal sense, it matters more. You got to have a foundation.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk more about, well, what is a foundation in a personal sense?
I mean, I think the highest and the lowest are connected here. The highest being, you need to know where you want to go, right? You got to have something in your head of, well, this is where I want to go and this is where I want to end up. This is what I want my body to look like. This is what I want my performance to look like if it's in an athletic sense. And how it connects to the lowest is essentially, well, where am I now? Maybe I'm overweight. Maybe I can't even run a kilometer. So it's like, well, I have a goal of running a 10K. What does it take? What are the steps that I'm going to have to go through to get there ultimately? So I think the point there is you've got to have an aim. You got to be realistic about where you are now, and then you actually got to understand each step along the route to that end goal.
Yeah, I think 100%. And the importance in that is if you've never run before, you've got to compound up to that 10K per se, right? There's no other way of doing it. If you're, overweight, you can't just wake up and run 10Ks. It's not in the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
Whereas in the investment sense, if you were just to whack your money in an investment or crypto, you can probably make 100% overnight.
Yeah.
Like, it's not likely, but it's possible, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in your personal life, there's no way in the world you can change overnight like that. Yeah. So I would actually say the notion of compounding is more important in personal life than it would be in a financial sense.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose, is the point you're making, you can't sort of speculate on something and get a random return on something like fitness. Like that take dedication and foundation, essentially.
Well, yeah, you can't get lucky in the way you look or your strength. You know what I mean? You can't just wake up one day and a stock price moon 200%. That's not going to happen to you. So
no.
You probably should compound your habits, and it's more important.
Yeah. I mean, on that point though, I would say most people that are in okay shape could go out tomorrow and run a marathon, right? And you could compare that to, well, I could go whack my money in speculative investments and I could get a really high return. But if I go out and run a marathon tomorrow that I'm not prepared for, the likelihood that I'm going to be so demotivated after that marathon where my body's destroyed, my mind's destroyed, maybe I've actually damaged something where I can't run now for the next 6 months. Like, you can make the comparison of, I make 200%. I think I'm smart. I put my money in other speculative investments and then I lose all my money. It's like, that's quite demotivating. And it's almost the foundational slower progression that'll actually breed larger dividends in the end.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, you probably could do that. If someone's in okay shape, they probably could go out there and try and run a decent amount of Ks, but
it's not the smart choice.
No, it's probably going to do them more bad than good over the long run.
Yeah,
especially if they haven't worked up to that amount of running or whatnot.
Well, you got to think about, like, you have a base level of energy, right? And the thing about something like muscular endurance is you're essentially training your muscles to move in a certain manner more efficiently over time. So it's like, this is where the compounding comes in. I've trained my muscles to essentially be more efficient over a longer distance, and it means that actually, say 1K for me now is super hard. In 5 years, a half marathon might feel like a 1K, and that's where the power of the compounding actually is. Like, it's very similar to financial in that sense, I would say.
Yeah, and I guess how powerful is that?
Well, I think the larger argument here is, why do you even need to compound? Why do you even need to progress? I think that's the question we're asking.
Yeah. Like, let's say there's certain goals and aspirations you have. I would say it's to be said, you can't really achieve those unless you do compound towards them. You can't just wake up one day without any experience in business and go out there and start a bank, per se, right?
But why is it even, you're right, but why is it even important to have goals and be moving forward? Because you could go out and you could just, I suppose, we talk about high dopamine activities and stuff. You could go out and just have a good time like that all the time. Why is it that it's even important? Like that, I think that's a fundamental question.
Sure. Well, you must have goals, right? If you don't have something to strive towards, what are you going to compound towards?
Yeah.
So I guess you got to have an aim and you got to work towards it. But if you don't understand the power of compounding, I would say every day you'll probably do things that they're going to work away from that goal, right? And if you wake up in the morning, from the first moment you wake up in the morning, everything you do and think compounds. Right? Do you think what do you think about yourself? Do you think good things? Do you do good things? Do you start the day off with a Subway cookie? You know, what are you doing? Because I would say it's those little details that over the course of your life actually decide where you're going to be.
Yeah.
And it's easy to go, it's just one day. You know, I feel tired today, or I've had a hard week. And that advice is out there. You know, I say a lot of advice online. You know, you should be easy on yourself. You know, if you've had a hard week, you know, take the day off. I disagree with that. I actually think you should be the hardest critic on yourself. I'm not saying you can't have days off. You can't have, you know, you went through something traumatic. Yeah, sure, you're going to rest for a period of time. But for the most part, you should be the last person giving yourself excuses not to do things.
I think lying to yourself actually is the worst sort of deception.
Well, that's essentially what you're doing. You're saying, you know, I had a really hard session yesterday, so I'm going to skip today. But what you're doing is just lying to yourself. You're giving yourself excuses, and you're going to lean into those moving forward.
Yeah.
You do it today, you do it next month, you do it for the next year.
Yeah. And is that... Because something like willpower is quite a, I suppose, hot topic, because people talk about willpower in terms of getting yourself out of bed in the morning at 5 a.m. Like, doing that's difficult, and over time, I suppose you build your willpower. Like, how much does that play into it? Can you compound your willpower? Like, we've obviously talked about in previous episodes, is it the anterior mid-singular cortex, that part of the brain that essentially expands over time? Like, how much has the mindset and, I suppose, the brain actually play into this process?
Yeah, heaps. I would say that's the exact point I'm making.
Yeah.
You do compound your willpower.
Yeah. You
don't just wake up one day and have this amazing routine. It happens over time.
Yeah.
I think all the brain, like that anterior mid-singular cortex, all the new brain research shows that. It shows your brain actually expands when you do things that are difficult and things that you also don't want to do.
Yeah.
So, what I'm saying is there's no way of getting to a level that's competent if you don't start with these little compounds.
I mean, I was watching an interview with Piers Morgan and Chris Williamson the other day, and essentially asked him about that importance of, well, do you need to be physically fit, or can you just go out and start businesses, etc.? He was sort of asking this question of, well, why is there so much importance placed on physical fitness these days? And I want to hear your thoughts on this. His answer was essentially that if you want to be mentally strong, make your body strong. And in doing that, in increasing, I suppose, your muscle strength, you actually increase the strength of your mind as well. Do you think that's an important point, or?
Sure. I would say the physical foundation is what you start with.
Yeah.
I don't know many people that are mentally tough if they're not in physical shape.
Yeah.
I would say that the two kind of work together.
Yeah.
But like if you're, like as he said, I think he says in that interview, if you're sitting at home feeling like shit, going out there and exercise is going to do much better for your mental health than just sitting there trying to unthink yourself out of a shit situation.
Yeah. That's almost acting yourself out of a shit situation.
That's right, yeah.
I think the importance of movement is that it's something you can tangibly control, right? There's plenty of stuff in your life you can't control. You can't control the reactions of co-workers. You can't really control the reaction of friends. You can't control what other people do. But you can control what you do on a day-to-day basis in terms of exercise. And we know from the research, there's so many chemicals and stuff that get released in your brain that are conducive to a healthy mind, essentially. And if you're in a healthy place, the likelihood you're going to be effective in other areas is way higher. Like health is wealth to some extent.
100%. Yeah, there's no wealth without good health, I would say.
Yeah. I kind of want to circle back to the point I was making earlier about why it's important to have goals and why it's even important to progress, because I think it is an important question. Like when you're demotivated, when you're feeling depressed, it's easy to go, oh, what's the point? Like life's sort of meaningless. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where I'm going. And this is actually a philosophical point. The meaning of life to some extent is to progress, is to become who you could be. And I suppose everything we talk about in terms of increasing your habits, your positive ones, work ethic, working out your body, etc., is because we're trying to allude to this point of progression being the meaning of life to some extent. And I want to hear your thoughts, because I've definitely felt it in my own life, is whenever I felt like I've been overwhelmed or I feel like I'm struggling, the way out actually has been to take on more responsibility and to actually increase my horizons. And in doing that, I actually got myself out of, I suppose, negative thinking or sort of ruts that you fall into, because you put a goal that's way out in front of, I suppose, what your limited perspective is at that time. And that actually gives you greater perspective. And working harder towards something bigger is very conducive to a positive frame of mind, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking what you're alluding to is you can't get out of those ruts in life if you don't have some sort of goal out there.
Yeah.
Because you're just completely demotivated and you'll probably give up.
Yeah.
So you got to sit down from the forefront and say, what do I actually want to achieve?
Yeah.
Because it's not about being, an elite athlete or making some sort of an insane monetary reward.
But maybe it is.
It may be. For the majority of people, it's probably not. But you got to have some aim, something you're actually striving towards.
Yeah. But it's got to be large enough and great enough that you're actually motivated by it. You know what I mean? It can't just be, all right, I've run a 5K, now I'm going to run an 8K.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's got to be, I've run a 5K, now I want to run a marathon.
Yeah.
And that's just an arbitrary example. Like, it could be something way grander, but I think it has to be good enough for you to think it's worth me getting out of bed this morning at 5 a.m. Like,
well, it's got to be like a far reach. So it's got to be kind of beyond what the realm of possibility to motivate yourself a little bit.
Yeah, you got to actually think, man, my life would be 100 times better if I had achieved this goal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
And by doing that, you're motivating yourself.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I guess what's the inverse of all this? Say you compound the inverse. What happens then? What does that even look like?
I mean, in a financial sense, it's the classic thing of if you lose 50% in the market, right? You say you have a portfolio of $100,000, you lose $50,000. Automatically, you have to make double that to get back to base.
Yeah.
And what that essentially stipulates is your losses actually compound faster and are greater over a short period of time than your gains. In my opinion, and I want to hear your thoughts, in my opinion, that does mean there has to be some level of, I don't know if conservatism is the right word, but there has to be some foundational basis for your thinking, because in the long run, if you lose and lose and lose and lose, well, you're going to be fully wiped out and you're going to be out of the game. You want to be in the game.
Sure. The issue is you got to work twice as hard to make what you lost.
Yeah.
If you're really healthy and let yourself go for 5 years, you're gonna have to work so much harder just to get to where you were, to that base level.
Yeah.
Same in investments, same in your health.
Yeah.
So the message is from me anyway, is don't fall off the horse. Don't fall off the horse. Even if you are going for a tough time, the best thing to do is just stay on the path. Just go to the gym.
Yeah.
Even if it's a shit workout, just show up.
Yeah.
Because if you completely let go, it's going to be so much harder. Just get back to that base level. And that's when that foundation comes in, as you're saying. You've got to have the knowledge. Why are you doing what you're doing? Why do you need to think all these good things?
Yeah.
You got to understand why. Why? Because it's in those tough times where essentially you will fall off. It's in when you've lost $50,000, you're questioning yourself, you're pulling your hairs out. Should I sell the rest of my money?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's a very similar concept in life. Something difficult happens, should I just give up? I've lost $50,000 on Tesla. Should I sell the rest? Should I, materialize that loss?
Yeah.
Exact same prospect, same notion, sorry.
I mean, I'll tell you something interesting about that. Essentially, your biology and your chemical processes in your brain correspond directly to what you perceive your social status to be. So if you're in a workplace and you're the janitor, you're going to have a completely different self-perspective, and concurrently you're going to have a different chemical release in your brain of dopamine and serotonin, etc., which essentially are the feel-good releases and things that actually make you feel confident or actually make you feel a lack of, compared to if you're the CEO, your biology is going to reflect that as well. So there is something to be said about having those connections to your environment to some extent, because you're going to be actually able to make better choices and be more confident in your choices. Because, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, I feel like a lot of people fail because they bow out too early. It's almost like, maybe you've lost 50% in this investment. Well, unless you materialize that, you haven't actually made the loss. And you're feeling this negative psychological pressure right now. But perhaps your foundation of investment's still there, right? And it just is asking you to hang on for longer. It's like, if you wait the next year or so, and this is just an arbitrary example, but if you hang on and you go through that, I suppose, darkness in the moment, well, you're going to come out the other side positive because you've actually stuck with something that you integrally decided upon. Like if you had an investment philosophy that you were following, say. Whereas I think a lot of people, they bow out too early from things. Like things get hard and then they give up. But I don't know, the difficulty is almost the test to see if you're actually dedicated to what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. So what are you saying? Are you saying that janitor can become the CEO if he stays the course, or what?
Well, it's just like you might feel bad now, but it's not unless you hang on and you keep going that you're actually going to breed positive results. Like it's that whole thing of if you miss every shot you don't take to some extent, and it's like unless you're consistently trying, you're never going to get there. Like things could get worse, but they could get better.
Yeah, I guess if you have that foundational knowledge, if you bought any given investment and you have a real philosophy about it, if you lose 50%, it actually doesn't matter because you know why you're buying it and you have that knowledge and you have that belief in it. And that's the same thing in your life. If you lose 50% of your progress in life, it's okay.
Yeah.
All you got to do is stay the course, and over the long run, it'll be nothing but a dip in the chart, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
100%. If you're built on actual reality and you have a strong foundation, the hardship is just along in the process, is what I'm supposed trying to get at.
Yeah, I agree. I think what's important to note is, I guess for me and you, we've done a lot of research, I guess personally on the brain, and I guess all these things tie into your cortex, that singular cortex we talked about, and there's real tangible effects in your brain, there's real tangible effects in your life. But for someone who doesn't understand it and doesn't care about their brain, obviously we have a bit of a passion towards that, so we look at it in our spare time. But someone who's got no idea, they don't really care about the science, they don't really care about the facts, what should they be doing and why should they be exercising?
Well, I mean, it obviously gets back to the chemical release thing of, well, you're going to feel good after you go for a 10K, a 5K. Like, you're automatically going to feel good. And that feeling good is going to transfer to everything else you do throughout that day. So it is about building even a positive foundation day to day. And it is the exact point of, I do something hard in the morning, everything else throughout the day is going to be easier in comparison. And it's like, if I do that every single day, well, automatically I'm striving upwards. And it's like that thing of, if you're not getting better, if you're staying the same even, you're actually getting worse. There's something called, forget the word, it's essentially the natural process in the world where if things aren't increasing, they're actually degrading and getting worse. Like, houses over time depreciate because things need to be repaired, the weather destroys it. It's the same with your mind. If you don't constantly attend to your mind, it's actually getting worse over time.
Yeah.
You need to be constantly increasing it. So I suppose that building of a foundation is done through physical exercise, in my opinion.
Well, it's the concept of inflation. You have your money in the bank account there. You're not losing money, but actually you are.
Yeah.
Because you're not beating the inflation on the interest you're earning. That's what you're saying there. And that, sure, that applies to your life. Yeah, what happens, as I said before, when things go south?
In terms of?
In terms of your personal life.
Well,
what happens if you compound so far where, metaphorically, the glass shatters?
I mean, you can make the argument that, and I'll use homelessness as the example. A homeless person, by all metrics, has nothing. They don't have a house. They clearly don't have a job. They probably don't have people that care for them because they probably wouldn't be on the street. It's like, if you relate that to a psychological evaluation of it, their biological reactions must be so negative because they can't get themselves out of the situation they're in. And they talk about homelessness being a mentality.
Right.
And it is to some extent. Once you hit zero is a number you can't multiply. Yeah. So it's like, unless someone almost gives you a step up, you're stuck there to some extent. So the importance of, and your question is, well, what does someone do if they hit zero, or what's the consequence? Well, the consequence is you're out of the game completely.
And there's no way back.
Pretty much, yeah.
There's no way back unless you get a lifeline.
Well, yeah, a lifeline. Like, the likelihood you'll become addicted to drugs, or you might even commit suicide or something like that. It's because it's that serious. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a fair point. Yeah. And I think I agree with you. And we've talked about it before. If you're a drug addict, it's much harder to stop doing drugs than someone who's never engaged in drugs. Once you've hit, I guess, rock bottom.
Yeah.
And once, it's like that notion of catastrophe theory. Once the glass shatters, it kind of pack your bags, it's game over.
Yeah.
And the message here today is, don't get to that point. Try not get to that point because, you are going to die one day. What sort of fulfillment do you want out of your life? And as you said previously, I think fulfillment is in the progress. And it doesn't have to be the progress in something monumental. It can be the progress in where you are today and where you want to be. There's purpose in that.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
That's probably a good place to end.
Yeah.